Thank you so much to SEBA Interpreters and to Babila Collective for all the work that they're doing to make a more inclusive event possible. Um, it is really a pleasure to have everyone here for another library lunch hour. All of you have made a wonderful set of events possible so far. Our first one was a general introduction to the collections. Our second library lunch hour was about a specific collection, the Taveras collection. And this one, I would like to introduce you to a Centro research associate so that she can discuss how our collections, and specifically our digital collections, can be used by educators or really by anyone who's interested in working with materials from our archives. So I will be introducing Dr. Elizabeth Taveras Rivera. She's a multifaceted educator. She's educated people from K through 12 to adults. She's a consultant and researcher who received her Ed.D. from Columbia University. She focuses on overall school development through curriculum expansion, student advocacy and inclusion, and multilingual learners. Dr. Taveras Rivera has experience in issues connected to cultural pedagogies, special education, homeschool partnerships, and more. And she is my coworker. She currently works as a research associate here at Centro, who is exploring the work lives of Puerto Rican educators and the role of culture in their retention. She is also interviewing Puerto Rican pioneers in bilingual education and the Puerto Rican studies. And she's made extensive use of our digital collections, and she's going to show you all today how you too can make extensive use of our digital collections. So I turn it over to my colleague, Elizabeth.
Buenas tardes, es un placer estar aquí. I'm so really excited to share and share my work and also talk about how you can also, as anybody just mentioned, use the digital collections at Centro. Okay. Give it a minute. So the title of my presentation, as you may have read, is Undocumented Citizens, Preserving and Documenting Puerto Ricans' Contributions in Education. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about myself and how I came to be in my professional career, and then share what the digital humanities and digital collections at Centro has to offer, and then present some of the work that I have done for my own digital collection. So I was born in Brooklyn, and I'm part of the cyclical migration that is experienced by many Puerto Ricans. And so this is a photo of me when I graduated from kindergarten in Caguas. And then in the 6th grade, I came back to live with family here in Brooklyn. And so this is a picture of me at my graduation. And the 6th grade was framed by the fact that I was left to sink or swim. There were no bilingual services at the school. And it was only because now in retrospect and having learned and heard the stories and the theories behind bilingual development, that I understand that it was because I had a strong literacy in my L1, my Spanish, that I was able to make gains, academic gains into this world of learning in English. And to the point that I had one teacher accusing me of faking my not being able to speak and do work in English because I was doing well in math. And so she thought if she's doing well in math, it's because she knows English and she's faking it for all the other courses. And so I have, as Anibal mentioned, I have worked with different grades. And in recent times, I have worked in local universities such as Teachers College, Fordham University, and City College. And last year I taught a class on bilingual education, the foundations of bilingual education through Long Island University. And what I've come to see through my work at Centro and through my work with educators is that even though, and I have a degree in bilingual ed, and so including my own personal experiences as a student, I now see that the contributions of Puerto Ricans in the field of bilingual education are very markedly missing. From the textbooks that we use, from the articles that we read or that our students read, it's not even a footnote. And so I was very blessed to work with Dr. Luis Reyes, who brought me into his world in working and documenting the pioneering work of Puerto Rican educators. And what I've learned is that Puerto Rican activism in education is as deep as our roots in the United States. And here I'm showing you a picture of Felicita and her husband Gonzalo Mendez. And this is a court case that is also not highlighted in the study of bilingual ed. The Mendez family advocated for the inclusion of their children into the local school, and they fought the segregation of the schooling districts in California in the 1940s. And they paved the way for later on in the 1950s for the case that is widely known as the Brown versus the Board of Ed in Topeka. However, again, I'm probably going to say this 100 times today, their fight and their struggle is missing, not only when we read about Brown versus the Board of Ed, but about parent advocacy and the advocacy of Puerto Ricans in education. Here's another photo of Felicita Mendez, and it was not until relatively recent times that the case was recognized for its impact and importance through the commemoration of the stamp that was that's now for sale at the U.S. Postal Office. But the reason why I included the stamp is to emphasize the fact that even though the reach of the case and the reach of the work was so deep, it's still not fully recognized in the general public. And so the other part of this story is the work of Evelina Lopez Antonetti. She came from Puerto Rico, lived in the Bronx for a very long time, and took on community activism as her calling. And so you could write a dissertation on all the things that Ms. Evelina did. But one of the main things that I want to highlight is that she organized the community on issues related to education. And one of the long-lasting impacts was that she was able to, through her community activism, to take control of a school that was set for demolition. The building was set for demolition, and created and the opportunity for the first bilingual school, PS 25. And I saw in the chat that Dr. Hernan Lafontaine, even if he might not have the title of doctor, but he has an honorary doctor from me and from anybody who knows about his work, was the first principal. And he's a central piece in bilingual ed, not only for the K through 12 students, but in bilingual ed as a field of study. I learned through our oral history that he spent the first year meeting with leaders in bilingual ed, such as Jim Cummings, traveling all over the country, going to Canada, studying what systems were already in place and how he could translate theory into creating a curriculum that honored the expectations of the parents and the community, in creating a school that not only offered the dual languages of Spanish and English, but also address issues of segregation by creating a community of learners where African-American students were involved, Puerto Rican students were involved. The teaching force was predominantly Puerto Rican, but there were also staff from other backgrounds. And it was about integrating the knowledge that and supports that come through a culturally relevant pedagogy. We now hear these terms ad nauseum, but in reality, it was the Puerto Rican influence that first took this as a challenge of integrating the cultural values and funds of knowledge of the community into the pedagogical experiences for the students. So here's one of the pieces. Just about everything I'm showing in here is comes from the digital collection at Centro. So this is one of the pieces about the PS25. I'll give you a second to look at it and read the little captions at the end. This is a cultural event celebration at the school. And as you can see, the materials were also in both languages. And one of the joys of working with Hernan Lafontaine through his oral histories was understanding these deep connections that continue to exist today. So for example, one of the early teachers at the PS25 was Sonia Nieto, who is now Professor Emeritus in bilingual education, a professor who dedicated her life to documenting the Puerto Rican experience in schools, understanding culturally relevant practices, and advocating for the learning opportunities of underserved communities in the United States. I'm gonna show you the next slide, which relates to the activism of college students. But I want to tie that also, for example, to Dr. Sonia Nieto, who is one of the students. She started her teaching at Ocean Hill, Brownsville, which was the center of community control issues in the city that was calling Puerto Rican and African American parents were calling for the inclusion of culturally relevant pedagogies specific to the Puerto Rican community and the African American community, so that Black and Brown children could learn about how their people had contributed and how their story interwove with the story that was being taught about US history, arts, and in every field of education you can possibly think of, which is a fight that we're continue to have today, where the browning of the curriculum is a thing. Instead of children K through 12 and in college learning about and educators integrating pieces of varied cultures into the curriculum, whether you're learning English or math or science, these are things that continue to be set aside. So unless at the college level, if you're taking an ethnic studies class, unless you're going to these classes, or you're not gonna engage with a broad history. You're going to engage with a limited history that is based on the white experience, the cisgender experience. And so leaving a lot of gaps for students that result in disconnects for and undermine the motivation of students to learn about the content recent times, Connecticut has become the first state to require students to take a Latino, Puerto Rican, and African American courses in order to graduate. However, these courses, including the ethnic studies courses, even though they're extremely valuable, they continue to be an aside. And so this question of full integration in the content continues to be a challenge. One of the experiences that I had was that I worked with student teachers at one of the city colleges. And when I proposed that they integrate material from Centro, especially, it became a mutiny. They refused to integrate pieces of the Puerto Rican experience into the courses that they were teaching. These were teachers working in predominantly Puerto Rican schools. These were teachers working in El Barrio. These were teachers teaching Spanish. And I had the Spanish teacher tell me that there was nothing of value that she could integrate into her Spanish language curriculum that reflected the Puerto Rican experience in the United States. If you give me a moment, I'm gonna look at my notes. So here we have Ms. Dilcia Pagan, and she was one of the students who was part of the student movement at Brooklyn College. And she co-founded the Puerto Rican Student Union, and also is instrumental in the development of the Puerto Rican Studies Department at Brooklyn College. And I'm going to minimize this for a second so that I can play a little bit of her oral, the recording of her oral history.
Wow. Yeah, he was part of Brooklyn College.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
But he wasn't a part, he was at that founding conference of PRSU?
he might have been. Joaquin might have been there. I know Joaquin from Brooklyn College. Gosh, let me look at the faces. I wish we had the pictures. And then we took over the board of the Board of Higher Ed. I remember.
Why did you take over the Board of Higher Ed?
Because the Board of Higher Ed had come out with a decision not supporting bilingual education, and we're not supporting the development of Puerto Rican Studies Department as we wanted, as we mandated. So we decided to take it over. We went to the bathroom and we took it over overnight. And when they came, we locked the place up. And this is PRSU, this is not the Young Lords. And I remember I was the Secretary of Communications. So I answered the phone, and it was such a joy to say, "Good morning, Puerto Rican Board of Higher Education." And all the media kept saying, "Can we call again? Can you do this again?" I thought it was very impactful that Puerto Rican students were doing these kinds of actions, demanding that the Board of Higher Education provide the courses that were so very necessary to promote our culture, to promote our reality of living in diaspora and our history as a Puerto Rican nation.
And so tell me, the Young Lords are forming at this time period. At PRSU becomes very close to the Lords. Why did you not join the Young Lords?
Well, I never had a need to join the Young Lords. I knew the guys, I knew all of them. I've known Denise, and what happened was I was invited to a meeting the day before the second church takeover. It happened to be at Pedro Pietri's house. During that period of time, I also meet Pedro Pietri, Miguel Algarin. There's a part of me that's always been involved in the arts. How that happens, I forget. I think it's the founding of the New Yorican Cafe, somewhere along that line, Santa Maria Esteves, because during the People's Church takeover, that's where I meet the people, the Young Lords, really, before the takeover. And then PRSU, the idea of PRSU was to be the educational arm so that our students would be a cohesive entity.
But originally they were separate from the Lords.
Exactly.
They were separate
Yes, and then
I have to refresh it for a second. Let's see.
Mhm.
And then PRSU, the idea of PRSU was to be the educational arm so that our students would be a cohesive entity.
But originally they were separate from the Lord.
Exactly.
They were separate for the
Yes.
original
And
design.
then it became a whole thing about who's more political than the other. And at that point, I thought that wasn't necessary. I thought that both entities could work together, but they didn't have to merge.
Mhm.
And they so chose to do it. I was not going to wear a military uniform.
So you were invited to a meeting the day before the second church.
Yeah. And then we already had PRSU. I said, the people, I cannot put people on an assignment, but whoever wants to support, chévere, I ended up, David Paris put me in security in the basement, and I did 11 days, and some of PRSU people came. Some people, the younger students, were scared. But then it became the holding place because it was 11 days. We opened up the doors. I remember putting together the New Year's Eve celebration. That's where Pedro Petri read the obituary, which he wrote in my house first time at Brooklyn College. That's why Pedro always says that I took him out of the poet's closet, because he used to hang out at my house. And I said, this is wonderful. Okay, I'm going to pay you. So we got the students to pay him, the student little money that we had, and we paid him to read the obituary. But the film that people have is when he read at the People's Church.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. So you said you were invited to a meeting the day before the second church takeover, and then you ended up staying 11 days doing security in the basement.
And ended up cooking scrambled eggs for the breakfast program. I must have cooked 75,000 dozens of eggs. But the most beautiful thing of the People's Church takeover was, given the place was secured from the windows, the welfare mothers would come. It's the church. And that church, my mother's cousin used to go to that church from Simpson Street, but that church is never open. So this day it's still
Well,
closed.
wasn't the Beatriz family members of the church?
Absolutely. So is Victor Alicea's family also. Yes. Beatriz, that's how we were able to be honest, that's how the Lord was able to get in, because of the relationship with Pedro.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
Pedro's uncle was a minister there, reverend.
So this is a little taste of some of the material that you can peruse through at your leisure. It's like finding a treasure trove and just endless, losing yourself in the endless possibilities of the material. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my project, which at this time I'm titling it Education in Puerto Rican Communities. I decided to, that what I wanted to do was establish the fact that Puerto Ricans have been here since before 1898, and that they have been working in providing the best educational opportunities aside from what was offered in the public school system. And I made my ending point in 1964 because that's the year before the passage of the Bilingual Education Act. And so I thought that that was a good place to mark my project. And so one of the things that happened, I'm showing here, Maria E. Sanchez, who was one of the early Puerto Rican educators. They were called the substitute auxiliary teachers. And this cadre of teachers came about when in the late 1940s, the New York City Committee of the Association of Assistant Superintendents, after conducting a year-long study, decided that Puerto Rican students in particular needed additional supports if they were going to succeed in their academic paths. And so Maria Sanchez was one of the first 10 teachers who were hired. They were going back to this culturally relevant pedagogy. They were cultural ambassadors, helping the predominantly white teachers understand and learn about Puerto Rican culture and history. They mediated communication between the home and the school. They helped to create curriculum that tapped into the prior knowledge and funds of knowledge of the students. Ms. Sanchez came from Puerto Rico, where she was one of 4 students who was one of 4 girls who entered the University of Rio Piedras that year. She moved to New York City in 1953, and she, again, her lifespans, the span of her professional work is just overwhelming. So some of the highlights I will mention is that she founded the Society of Puerto Rican Auxiliary Teachers, the Puerto Rican Educators Association, and the Hispanic chapter of the United Federation of Teachers. In 1972, she was recruited by Brooklyn College and to help establish the bilingual education program at the college. She was appointed to the Department of Puerto Rican Studies, a new creation that was also the result of activism by Puerto Rican students, other students of color, African-American students, and and progressive students, including Jewish students, who wanted to create opportunities at the college level for students of color through the open admissions process. Professor Sanchez also worked with Sonia Nieto to establish the undergraduate and graduate program in bilingual bicultural education. And she was at the center of a 2-year protest led by students at Brooklyn College when the university officials decided to name an outside person to come in and chair the department, and students who had worked with her and her colleagues and knew the level of commitment and the depth of her experiences in creating these different organizations and in supporting the students and the future professors of bilingual ed, protested the naming of an outside person to take over the work that she had been doing. And recently, the group from Brooklyn College, a movie was made called Making the Impossible Possible, which documents this fight for input by the students into the running of the education. Input that also highlighted the inclusion of stories of color in the curriculum across the different content. Here we have the homepage for Centro for when you're looking for digital content. The content includes photographs, documents, oral histories. Some of the oral histories are audio, as you just witnessed, and then some of them have been videotaped. Some of the main collections at Centro include the Research Task Force General Collection, the Aspida of the New York Collection, and the Puerto Rican Department of Labor Collection. So one of my goals for the upcoming year is to go in person, because many of the, a lot of the paperwork related to the hiring of the substitute auxiliary teachers is housed in the collection. So it's not digitized at this point. So, you know, you start digital and then you go back in person, and it's a dance that you continue to do throughout your research. So if you want to create your own collections, you register first, and then you can see, so on the top left-hand corner, it shows you where you would go to register. Once you register and your account is approved, it's yours for the duration of your lifetime. And then it allows you to create these light boxes. And the light boxes are smaller folders. And you can see here some of my folders, my light boxes. I have that I have in my collection. And then when you search, the program will also give you some suggestions as other things that you can look for. Each collection also has a finding aid, such as the one on poet Pedro Pietri. The finding aids, aside from listing the materials in the collection, provide an introduction into the life or historical moment represented in the materials. And the finding aids help the readers expand the research by identifying relationships among individuals, organizations inside and outside the Puerto Rican community that also speak to the topic that you're researching. The timelines also, rather the digital collections also include a timeline. And so I will show you the timeline for Pedro Piquito. And so if you're here on the website, you can scroll through the timeline and then it will show you the materials that we have related to the person. So that's another way of understanding, providing context for the your topic, and you can also present your information by using a timeline. So if we go back here, so again, these are some of my light boxes. I organized them by themes, such as discrimination, Liga de Puerto Rico, Club de Damas. And I also have light boxes by person. So I have one on Antonia Pantoja, Pura Belpré, and then I have collections by decades. It's a lot, you're gonna find a lot of material, so you'll figure out your own way of organizing things. And what I have also done is that I created a spreadsheet to track my search. So what terms did I search? What did I find? And when did I search for these items? Because like I said, it becomes a very massive project, and then you lose track of what you did last week, let alone what you did 6 months ago. So I know that I saw Dr. Hernan Lafontaine had his hand raised a number of times. I wasn't able to reach out to you, but I'm not sure if anybody, if we can have.
Yeah, absolutely. We can move on to our Q&A. I already answered one of the questions in the chat. Someone asked what web platform are we using for our digital collections? That's a very good question. We use a modified version of a platform called Collective Access. And so the material gets digitized. It has metadata that is assigned to it, and then it is uploaded, and then people can access it. And the beauty of a collection like this, that's digital, as opposed to working in a physical collection, is that you can search by keywords, and then you can search for all of the material relating to your area of interest across a variety of our collections. So there are definitely more than one. There's definitely more than one collection that talks about the Young Lords. So if you do a search, you'll see that it'll pull from various collections that we have digitized. I also want to make it clear that what you see in our digital collection does not represent the totality of our collections. Digitization is a very long, ongoing process. Right now, we're in the middle of a NEH grant to digitize an additional 24,000 images and make those available. So we hope to have that done within the next year or so.
I was scrolling through the chat very quickly, the sitting and reading at the same time. Your brain gets split.
Yeah. Can someone someone on the Centro team please drop the link to the form to make a appointment at Centro? There's a
right now.
question in the chat that says, can I make an appointment for individual tutorial? So I'm going to answer that one live. Absolutely. Kimberly will put the form in, and then you can make an appointment to come in and either view any of our collections, or if you want to sit down at a computer here and work with the digital collection, I'd be more than happy to help you navigate the digital collection and provide this a tutorial.
Do you want to, are we able to give access to Hernan Lafontaine so that he can maybe have the floor? I know he had raised his hand a number of times.
I can try to do that. Give me 1 second.
Sure. I mean, I'm a little, what do you call that? You know, I might think that my topic is the best topic, or my focus in education is the best focus. But I have to say that it's very exciting because it just goes through everything, right? So if you're learning history, if you're learning about medicine, if you're learning to be a scientist, everything gets siphoned through a lens of education. And so, and as you find the materials, you see all the connections. So in doing research for this presentation, I came across some of the material from Evelina, and she had written a letter to a teacher at PS21. And in the letter, she mentions that she knew Julia de Burgos. And so she starts talking about Julia de Burgos. So, you know, there's these interconnections are what make it such a great tool for integration into the different content area. And that's what we want teachers to know. And because at the end of the day, your job, for me, my job as a teacher is to expose students to information and broad enough so that my personal biases are not the main focus of what material I am presenting and what experiences and points of views I'm presenting, but rather letting the student have a sense that life and history is very complicated, and for them to engage in this critical process of creating a belief system based on the information that they get at the school, based on the community's sense of knowledge. And so we have to, tenemos que ampliar how we go about teaching, not only in supporting the ethnic studies, but in really working with the experts so that I can integrate that. So even if I don't take an ethnic studies class, I'm still learning about the contributions of Puerto Ricans. If I'm learning Shakespeare, if I'm learning biology, whatever it is, I shouldn't have to go outside of my department all the time to learn about the contributions of other peoples in the field.
I gave Hernan permission to speak, so you and Elizabeth, you and him can have a direct dialogue, or Hernan, if there's anything you would like to say, because you've had your hand raised, please, now is the time to speak up.
Make sure you unmute yourself, Hernan.
Perhaps he's not there.
Oh, maybe. We'll come back. I see this is, you know, I got a little nervous at the end, at the beginning when I saw the names listed in the participation roster.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Evelyn LaFontaine, Adnan's wife. And unfortunately, Adnan had to leave for another appointment. He's very disappointed that he couldn't stay on with you and participate. He thinks what this presentation is very, very valuable in terms of providing that important overview of the history of bilingual education in our community. Is there any question that you want to ask? I was a teacher at the bilingual school, PS 25, when it started. So I have experienced the whole educational field with regard to bilingual, bicultural education. So he does apologize that he had to leave.
Well, I guess one question I have is about the, how you went about developing the curriculum so that it reflected the Puerto Rican community, but I know that all of the students were not Puerto Rican. So if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yes, well, the school had Puerto Rican students and Black African-American students, and we had a dual program. That is, the Puerto Rican Spanish-speaking students had their curriculum mostly in Spanish, starting in kindergarten, and as they progressed through the grades, the English was increased. They always had ESL through the grades, but they started learning to read in their language, because the philosophy was that you begin with the spoken language of the child, the home language of the child. Conversely, the English-speaking students had their curriculum started in English. They had Spanish as a second language throughout, and they gradually began to learn in content areas in Spanish. So the model was start with the basic language, introduce the other language slowly, and increase that as they went through the grades. And there was a whole curriculum design that was put together to map that out.
And one of the things that I forgot to mention that I have in my notes is that when I interviewed Hernan, he was talking about the fact that when they thought him and the teachers, they wanted to continue learning. And so he wrote a grant and went to pay for additional graduate courses for the staff. When he went to the different universities, nobody had a program.
That's correct.
So can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, he got the funding to provide a master's program at the university. So many of the staff were able to take a course in bilingual, bicultural education, and at the same time earn credits towards a degree in a master's degree. So that was very, very unique in having that kind of college level course that focused on bilingual, bicultural education. And that was something that was very valuable later. And that was also tied in with the conference that we had in New York City on bilingual, bicultural education. It was the first bilingual conference that we had in the city. And that moved with our also connecting with colleagues out west in California, in Arizona, and so forth, to begin to explore how we could establish a national association for bilingual education. And Hernan was involved in that effort of being one of the first founders of the National Association for Bilingual Education.
Thank you. There's so many stories, to go over. I'm looking at the time. It's already 12:53, and one of the things that was illuminating when Hernan was talking was that when he went to the area universities, no one could provide the service, even though he had the money to pay for the program. And so he ended up putting together the curriculum and bringing in the professors who were going to be teaching these bilingual classes. So, you know, at every step of the way, the Puerto Rican influence is marking this field. And again, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have my own rationale for why it is that we don't appear. But from an outsider's perspective, if I'm asking, you know, the people who create these textbooks, why is it that we're not included? I don't know what their answer would be. But it does a disservice because it helps to reinforce this deficit perspective that continues to be part of the narrative of when people talk about Puerto Ricans. And so I was telling somebody that this work that I do, not only is it important for the community at large, but I take extreme pleasure and because it fuels my identity and it makes me feel good that I'm a Puerto Rican, and it, you know, it reminds me that we are more than what's been said about us. I'm scrolling through the chat.
Okay.
Liz, unfortunately, we have a hard stopping time of 1 p.m. So as wonderful and enlightening as this all is, and Anand, thank you so much for your conversation and your feedback. It was great to have somebody who was there also provide, like, you know, their firsthand account, which is great. We are going to have to start winding it down because it is 1 p.m. But we want to thank you all for coming. We thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Elizabeth. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to the Puerto Rican Sign Language interpreters and to Babija Collective, as well as Anibal, for helping to facilitate this conversation. We hope to see you at the next library lunch hour, which will be in November. We will send out a newsletter so you'll get the date and time and the exact link to register. We also do hope to see you this Thursday for our Decolonizing Solidarity event beginning at 5 p.m. We will drop the link in the chat for that. But for now, we'll say goodbye and we'll see you all very, very soon.
Take care.